Hey, what's going on? So the engine bay is finally painted. I went ahead and got the whole front clip coated in a two-part epoxy primer, inside and out, and man, it was a lot of work. It was a very tedious process. Basically taught me two things. Number one, it absolutely sucks to get the paint down to bare metal, especially in the tighter to get to areas. But honestly, I think it's the way to go. If you don't know how the car was painted previously, the last thing you want to do is lay fresh new paint over, old unknown paint and then have a reaction, especially after you've done hours and hours of prep and cleaning. So in my opinion, better be safe than sorry. And two, this process has uncovered levels of OCD that I never knew I had. Just making sure everything was sanded properly and nothing was left untouched. You tend to micro focus on certain areas and kind of forget about the big picture. At the end of the day, it's all in the details, and hopefully it shows. Now you get a clean canvas and a fresh start, and a really solid foundation for your new paint. So like I said, I spent a ton of time getting this down to bare metal and making sure it was 100% clean. I wiped it down a bunch of times with wax and grease remover, then wiped it a million more times with a tack cloth. I also cleaned the garage up, made sure there was no debris kicking up when I was spraying the primer onto the car. It's just stuff you need to consider when you're doing a project like this in a garage. Primer's a little more forgiving, so it suits a garage environment a lot better than, say, something like a clear coat or like a full paint job. But in this case, for like the final finish, I'll definitely be taking it to a paint booth and getting it professionally painted for sure. That's there's no worries with that. Initially, I was gonna just do the inside of the engine bay, like sand it, prep, clean the inside, and paint the inside, and then leave the outer clip for later on. But I figured, what's the point? Might as well just do it all in one shot. It's just more efficient, less redundant that way. It took a little bit more time, but as you can tell already, this isn't a rush project. It is what it is, right? But having said that, it was all worth it. I'm super happy with the results. In my opinion, it came out fantastic. This is just two-stage epoxy primer over bare metal. There's absolutely no filler in it yet. And I'm telling you right now, it's not gonna require a lot of filler to, get it where I want it to be, which is awesome. The last little final touch to get it to that level of, finish that I'm really looking for. So that's enough of the engine bay. Kind of over the sanding and prep work and constantly being covered in dust. So kind of want to move on to something else for a little while. Now that the front clip is all epoxied and sealed up, I feel comfortable taking a break from it now that I know it's protected from rusting and all the other elements. You don't want to leave exposed bare metal out for too long before it starts, getting contaminated. So I'm gonna start working with the IRS and hopefully start taking it out so I can test fit the torque boxes, get going on that, see what works, what doesn't, and just go from there. So this is a wheel off my other car. It's a 19 by 11 with a decently aggressive offset for a solid axle. Custom finished in a 3-stage hyper silver paint, I may add. But yeah, I figured it'd be a perfect time to give it a test fit before I have the IRS out of the Cobra. Basically to see how this wheel spec would fit on an IRS car. The IRS runs about 3/4 of an inch more narrow on each side, so it's actually going to pull the wheels in a little bit. The IRS also allows the wheel to camber in, which a solid axle doesn't. So in terms of a street setup, I'm really leaning towards more of an aggressive look, whether that's a more aggressive offset or a wider wheel, wider tire, whatever. If I can pull any of those out because the IRS is a little more narrow, then I will. But I'm just gonna have to wait and see how it all fits, see how it all looks, and then go from there. So the first problem I ran into is I don't have the locking key for this lug nut here. I pulled one out of another car. This one looked like it was kind of the same design, same shape, but it doesn't fit, so gonna have to be plan B, which is a 19mm deep socket. It's a 12-point socket rather than your standard 6. And the reason for that is this lug nut is smooth, so with the 12 points it's got a better chance of biting into that smooth lug nut. And the 19mm is just enough to put the socket over the lug nut. It's going to have to be hammered in, but it'll hopefully be enough to bite into it and break it loose. Don't go stealing wheels, okay? Alright, so I got the wheel off. If you hear popping and banging in the background, that's just my garage door getting blown by gusts of wind. Up here we just got a huge ice storm last night, which is crazy because we're well into April, but anyway, I got the wheel off. First thing I notice is it's pretty damn clean in here. Everything looks pretty stock. So the springs are definitely factory Ford springs. You got the factory Bilstein rear shocks. The only thing that's not stock is the catback exhaust. I mentioned it previously. I think it's like 3-inch or so Flowmaster catback, and there's a spacer on the wheel. So I'm gonna go ahead and measure the spacer right now. I have a feeling it's 1 inch, but I could be wrong. Yeah, it's 1 inch. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually mount the wheel with the spacer on just to see how it looks with, you know, an even more aggressive offset than what the wheel is. This will actually help compensate for the 3/4 of an inch discrepancy between the IRS and the solid axle. Like I said before, the solid axle is actually 3/4 of an inch wider than the IRS. So by having this 1 inch spacer on here, it'll kind of even it out, make it very similar to what I have in my other car. Obviously, 1/4 of an inch, is a pretty big difference for the offset of a wheel, but then again, the IRS does have a little bit of camber as opposed to the solid axle, which doesn't have any camber at all. And you can fine tune that as well. You can, I think, pull like 1 to 1.5 degrees of camber. Don't quote me on that, I'm not 100% sure, but from what I remember, I think that's close to what it is. So just by looking at the setup of the IRS, there are quite a few differences between this and a solid axle car. The first few things here, the mounting point for the IRS sits here near the shock, which I'm hoping this doesn't pose any type of problem with the wheel fitment. And then you have the exhaust kind of pulls out with this exhaust hanger here, and that could potentially be an issue for fitment, but we'll just have to see what it looks like with the spacer. And if there's a significant amount of room, then I'll try it without the spacer and see how that fits, and then we'll go from there. So the exhaust and the exhaust hanger are definitely not an issue. There's a ton of space in between. IRS mount looks to be okay. I know it's tough to see, but there you go. The wheel does tuck in or camber in a little bit as the suspension travels, but I think that should be enough. I mean, I don't know if it's gonna camber in that much to be an issue with that upper mount there. Without the spacer, it might be another story, but there's only one way to find out, really. I'm gonna put the wheel on the ground and see what happens, see how it looks. That looks ridiculous. Oh man. I wanted aggressive. That is aggressive, that's for sure. So I checked the upper IRS mounting point. There's a ton of space in there. It didn't really move too much, so that's good news. But man, this is something else. The lip of the wheel definitely pokes out past the fender lip, so this might be just a tad too much, but you know, if it didn't have the stock springs on it, it would give you a better idea of the overall look with a lower ride height, which is critical to this type of look, but well, it looks pretty badass either way. As the car goes lower, the wheel would tuck in a little bit so it wouldn't bulge out as much as this. This would be unacceptable, but that's where, you know, the IRS's camber adjustment comes into play as well. There's a lot of different options for fitment. I haven't really decided on what exactly I'm going to do, but the one thing for sure is it's going to be aggressive either way, whether it's something that looks like this or something with a meteor tire on the back. And that's just for street trim. I mean, I'm not going to be drag racing with 19-inch wheels. This is just to cruise around as a street car, but if I want to go to the track, I'll probably just get some, you know, wheels for the track and put some decent tires on it and have fun that way too, you know. So here it is without the spacer. The wheel actually sits pretty flush with the lip of the quarter panel, which is kind of surprising. I thought the wheel would be way more sunken in, but the main thing to take away from this definitely is there's no interference from anywhere on the inside of the wheel, which is awesome. Exhaust has tons of space, the hanger has tons of space. The biggest issue that I'm kind of anticipating is that IRS bolt. If I do run a wider tire, it might hit the bolt, so that's something I'm gonna have to look into a little more. But I'm definitely starting to get an idea of what will work and what won't. If this thing had the proper ride height, the IRS would definitely be able to pull these wheels off. The only thing really is the head of that IRS bolt is pretty tall, so if I can get something a little lower profile, I don't think I'll have any issues running an even wider setup, whether that's like the wheel or tire or both, we'll see. But I think I'm going to cut the video off here because next I'm going to take the IRS out and I don't want this to be like a 40-minute video, so I'll stop it here. I'll see you on the next one.